Chapter 1583. Shadow Avatar Sunny found himself surrounded by 6 identical versions of himself, all staring at him with confused expressions. Alabaster skin, raven black hair, eyes that were like glistening onyx. All of them were clad in full suits of fearsome onyx armor. As well, its design both intricate and impregnable. He stared at them back. For a moment, Sunny was scared. And who could blame him? He had just managed to rid himself of the sin of solace, avoided being consumed by the mad prince, and survived a meeting with his frightening future self, each a version of him. But no, none of the 3 were among the 6 copies that were sitting around him in a semicircle. In fact, the 6 impostors looked strangely familiar, and not just because they looked exactly like him. Rather, they were like versions of Sunny that each possessed a distinct personality, which subtly changed how they looked. One was sullen, another was joyful, one was deadpan and unsettling, while the one next to him was arrogant and disdainful. The 5th copy seemed mischievous, while the last one looked like a complete lunatic. They were his shadows. Sunny felt like pinching himself. "Hey, you guys, what are you doing?" 6 identical copies of him glanced at each other, then shrugged in unison. That's not helping. When it became clear that none of them were going to explain himself, Sunny shook his head in bewilderment. So, this was his transformation ability. Come to think of it, it makes sense. Transformation abilities were varied. Some were more unique, while most allowed saints to assume the shape of powerful beasts. Sunny had expected to become a giant beast as well, but then again, wasn't he already capable of that? His mastery of Shadow Shell allowed him to assume the form of all manner of creatures, provided he knew how. Serpents, leopards, and winged horrors. As long as Sunny studied someone for a bit, he could grasp the essence of their being through shadow dance and recreate it through shadow manifestation. Of course, that transformation was purely physical and did not grant him the mystical powers of the beings whose forms he used. In that regard, Shadow Shell was a lesser version of a true transformation ability, but it was still an immensely powerful tool and much more versatile than almost any such ability could be. It was reasonable, then, that his transformation would have nothing to do with his body. Instead, it had to do with the invaluable helpers that followed him around. His shadows. The new ability transformed them into perfect copies of Sunny, which was different from simply making them tangible through shadow manifestation. If simply made tangible, the shadows were fragile and vulnerable, exposing his soul to lethal damage. These shadow avatars, however, were just as strong and durable as Sunny's own body was. That much was already apparent. He could see the proof himself. That proof was the marble mantle. No, it would be the onyx mantle now, wouldn't it? Its bound trait was supposed to make it as strong as his soul was. Since Sunny was transcendent now, the mantle would have risen to a new rank as well. In any case, the mantle was a manifestation of the onyx shell attribute. And since each of the shadows was clad in the fearsome armor, they seemed to possess the same attribute, which meant that they possessed the rest of his attributes too. Master of Shadows, Flame of Divinity, Onyx Shell, and the 3 weaves, Blood Weave, Bone Weave, and Soul Weave. Faded, meanwhile, was up in the air. Sunny was not sure if he even had such an attribute anymore. He took a deep breath. Since the shadow avatars possessed his attributes, they were just as resilient and durable as him. The weaves granted them strength and made their bodies exceedingly tenacious, while the onyx shell granted them protection against all kinds of attacks, as well as a handful of extremely useful traits. So they were just as robust as him. But were they as powerful? What exactly could they do? Sunny hesitated for a moment, and then decided to find out just that. He could still perceive the world through the shadows. Now that Sunny composed himself, He could give them a few simple commands to see what they were capable of while manifested through his transcendent ability. He concentrated on the gloomy version of himself. Sonny was about to open his mouth to give the command, but at that moment, something strange happened, making him fall silent. As he concentrated on the shadow and its perception, it was as though their connection deepened and changed. Sonny was still looking at the sullen version of himself, and in turn looking at himself through the eyes of the sullen shadow, but it felt entirely different. It was as though he was not just perceiving himself from outside his body, but actually had two bodies. Startled, Sonny flinched back. At the same time, his second body flinched back too, and he felt himself flinching back twice. He opened his mouth. "What the hell? What the hell?" His second body cried out, as well, two identical voices breaking the silence of the dusty pocket of space at the same time. Sonny froze, looking at himself, and at the same time his other body also froze, looking at himself. He felt the cracked floor under his hands, and shards of concrete under his other hands. Sonny raised his left hand and waved at himself, simultaneously raising his other left hand to wave at himself. How weird! It was indeed as if there were two of him. He could not only perceive the world through the shadow avatar, but also control it as he would his own body. As his eyes suddenly glistened with burning intensity, Sonny concentrated. In the next moment, his own body waved its left hand again, while the shadow avatar waved its right. Complete independence. Throwing a glance at the other 5 copies of himself, Sonny gritted his teeth. Then, each of the 7 identical young men trapped in the ruins performed a separate action. One rose to his feet, another lowered himself to the floor, one turned his head to the left, while the one next to him turned his head to the right. The 5th closed his eyes, the 6th pressed his hands against his ears. The last one covered his mouth with a hand. 7 stunned gasps resounded at the same time, one of them slightly muffled. The first Sonny, the original Sonny, swayed a little. Controlling 7 bodies at the same time put a lot of pressure on his mind, but it was not nearly as burdensome as almost anyone else would have found it. Sonny was perfectly accustomed to perceiving the world from multiple points of view, after all, so although it took some adjustment to exist in 7 places at the same time, he was more than capable of managing it. It was going to take some time to get used to it, but Sonny had no doubt. One day soon, he would be able to wield his 6 shadow avatars into battle. Which meant that, instead of becoming a saint, Sonny had become 7 saints. After calming down a little, Sonny conducted a few simple experiments to figure out what exactly his shadow avatars were capable of. The results left him a bit breathless. The most important thing about his transformation ability was that the manifested shadows were, indeed, no different from himself. They possessed the exact same body and the exact same attributes. More than that, they were just as powerful as Sonny, meaning each of the 6 avatars was as fast, strong, and resilient as a transcendent terror. But that was not all. Not only did they possess the same power as him, they could also use the same abilities as him, meaning that all 6 avatars could independently use shadow control, shadow step, and shadow manifestation. They could also summon his shadows, wield the memories he possessed, and weave strings of shadow essence. Most frighteningly of all, each of them could form their own shadow shells. Even though maintaining several shells at the same time almost made Sonny pass out, he could theoretically turn each of his avatars into a different kind of terrifying creature. There were 2 things Sonny and his shadow avatars shared, though. The first one was rather obvious. It was his mind. The shadow avatars could act independently, following his commands to the best of their ability. But when he took direct control of their bodies, it was not as though he suddenly had several consciousnesses. Rather, his soul consciousness controlled many bodies and therefore took on the corresponding burden. A weird quirk of that situation was that the shadows refused to speak unless the body was directly controlled by him, despite being physically able to. Whether it was an external limitation or simply not in their nature, he did not know. In any case, that meant that his flaw prohibited him from lying even through the mouths of the avatars. The second thing Sunny shared with his avatars was his soul. That was why they were able to summon his shadows and his memories. That was also why all 7 of them shared the same pool of shadow essence. Maintaining the avatars already cost him a considerable amount of essence. If all of them went around using powerful enchantments and activating their abilities simultaneously, the result would be truly cataclysmic, without a doubt, but also short-lived. If Ascended Sunny possessed this transformation ability, he would have been forced to only use it to deliver short bursts of truly devastating damage or short periods of incredible utility. However, Sunny was not ascended anymore. His transcendent soul was full of frighteningly potent essence now, and could passively replenish it with spirit essence when in the embrace of shadows, to boot. Just as important was the fact that he had Soul Weave. Soul Weave entirely changed the potential of his transformation ability. With it reinforcing his soul, Sunny could summon the full wrath of his avatars for much longer. Beside that, he could also sustain a few of them permanently without losing any essence. The natural rate at which it was expended and replenished now made it so that he did not need to dismiss at least a couple of his avatars at all, which meant that he was one of those exceedingly rare, freakish saints who could maintain their transformation indefinitely. There was another important piece of information in that latest discovery, too. It was that he did not need to transform all of his shadows at the same time. He could make some into avatars while keeping the rest in their natural form. Those shadows that remained in their natural form, then, could augment either him or the manifested avatars. The proportion could be whatever he desired. He could augment himself with all 6 shadows, manifest an avatar and augment it with the remaining 5 shadows, share the augmentation between himself and the avatar, do the same with 2 avatars, and so on. In short, it was a supremely flexible and adaptable ability. Sunny could shift freely between being a single source of overwhelming power or several sources of slightly less unreasonable might. With his shadows added into the mix, the amount of strategies he could come up with grew even more varied. In short, it's ridiculous. The amount of power and flexibility that Sunny now commanded was nothing short of daunting. He was already slightly frightened by his transcendent might. Now that there could be 7 of him, that feeling only grew more intense. Sunny had always held a lot of respect for saints, but now that he was a saint himself, and one of the most powerful saints in existence, no less, he truly understood why each of them was a singular existence among the awakened. Granted, there were some limitations to his newfound power. The burden on his mind and reserves of shadow essence was one of them, obviously. The need to arm each of the avatars with suitable equipment was another. They might all be wearing the onyx mantle, but that was simply because it was a manifestation of his attribute. If he summoned a powerful memory weapon, 6 copies of it would not magically appear in the hands of the avatars. There would be only one. Which was a moot point for the moment. Sunny did not even have a memory weapon right now, let alone a powerful one. How the mighty have fallen. He spent a moment in bitter silence, shocked at the fact. And by thinking about it, Sunny had to face some other facts. Now that he had conducted the exploration of his new abilities, an initial exploration, at least, he had no choice but to turn his mind to other matters. Much more frightening matters than his transcendent power was. What had happened at the end of the nightmare? What had that cursed terror, whose identity was rather obvious, done to him? Was his fate really broken, and was he free? What had happened with the other members of the cohort in Verge? Were all of them all right? What had happened to Antarctica after the Battle of the Black Skull? Now that Sonny was back in the waking world, there was no escaping finding the answers to all these questions. He looked at his 6 identical but distinct avatars. After a few moments of silence, Sonny asked, "Shall we go take a look?" Just as expected, he was met with silence. The shadows seemed to be looking at him with expressions of support, though each in its own way. Sonny took a deep breath and then looked up, at the unstable ceiling of the pocket of space, inside a ruin that he had found himself in. "Let's climb out of this concrete tomb, then." Sonny looked at the ceiling, extending his shadow sense upward. At the same time, he allowed his mind to drift back to the very end of the nightmare. And what a nightmare it had been! Sonny did not know how long he had spent wandering the dreadful currents of the great river, trying to escape the tomb of Ariel. The last cycle had taken, how long was it? Close to a year. And that was only his subjective time. For some people, like Cassie and Mordred, it had lasted for much longer. But that was only the final of the countless cycles. So, he could not even guess how long of a journey it had been. What he did know, however, was that it ended in the very heart of the estuary, past the silent lake where Ariel's heretical testament had been inscribed, near the forgotten grave of the demon of oblivion, where a cursed terror had been waiting for him, hidden in the darkness. That terror, Sonny was more or less sure who it was. The loathsome thieving bird, hated both by the gods and the beings of the void. It was the thieving miscreant who had stolen one of Weaver's eyes, and whose spawn he had slain on the forgotten shore, thus receiving the drop of ichor and Weaver's lineage. That single event had started the chain of falling dominoes that intertwined his fate with the nebulous demon, as well as the rest of the demons and the dead gods. Wasn't it very ironic, then, that the thieving bird would be the one to break that fate? And Sonny was pretty sure that that was exactly what the vile thing had done. The moment the thieving bird's talons plunged into his chest, he felt it taking something from his soul. But then, he vaguely sensed it taking something else, from somewhere that lay even deeper. It was a hard thing to describe. Even now, Sonny felt somehow different, in addition to all the changes caused by the transcendence. It was as though a burden he did not even know he was carrying had been lifted, making him feel both unburdened and scarily untethered. Had the vile thieving bird stolen his fate? That would certainly be one way, an indescribably bewildering and roundabout way, for Cassie's promise that he would gain freedom in the estuary to come true. It would also explain whose true name Torment had delivered to the blind seer at the cost of her life. But what did it mean, exactly, for his fate to be stolen? Did it even work? Did he lose the fated attribute? Was he really free? What about Shadow Bond? He had been banished from the nightmare spell as a result of losing his fate. Would his mystical connection to Nephi's be severed, as well? Sonny frowned, knowing that he would find out soon. One thing is certain, though. If the nightmare had not ended at just the right moment, he would have certainly been killed. Sonny could justifiably be proud of his power and prowess, but he was a mere ant in front of a cursed terror, and a very special cursed terror at that. If even Weaver had fallen victim to the vile thieving bird, what hope did he have to resist it? What was that thing even doing in the burial chamber? Why did it enter the tomb of Ariel? And how did it get past the guardian of the lake? The last question was the easiest to answer. The vile thing had even been able to steal from the demon of fate, so bypassing a guardian left behind by Ariel would certainly have been easy for it. As for the other two, a piece of Weaver's soul had been left in the heart of Ariel's tomb. Perhaps the thieving bird had become obsessed with the demon of fate. The description of the drop of ichor said that it had been enamored by Weaver's beautiful eyes after all. not to mention that it had gone mad after witnessing the reflection of the void frozen in Weaver's pupil. Had it stolen Sonny's fate because it was connected to the enigmatic demon? If so, it would have probably taken his body and soul as well, given the chance. He had inherited 3 parts of Weaver's lineage after all. Was the nightmare ending just at the right moment simple luck, or the last gift from Fated? Sonny did not know, nor did he care really. If he was truly free from that damned attribute, he would rather never remember that it had ever existed at all. Let's go. He had already extended his shadow sense as far as he could, which was much further than before, now that he was a saint. Sadly, all he could feel was a mess of compressed concrete and alloy for dozens of meters above. That was only logical, considering that Valor's stronghold in Antarctica had been largely built underground. He was more or less buried alive. Figures. Still, there was no reason to worry. Sonny could not simply use Shadow Step to reach the surface, but he was more than strong enough to burrow through the ruins. Mundane concrete and alloy could not stop a saint. However, there was a simpler method. Sonny lingered for a moment, then dismissed his avatars and wrapped the shadows around his body. Then, he dissolved into the darkness, becoming a shadow himself. The collapsed stronghold was not a monolith. Even after it crumbled, there was plenty of space left between the debris, perhaps not enough to accommodate a human body, but more than enough for a formless shadow to slip through. Gliding up the wall, Sonny slid into a thin crack between 2 concrete plates and slithered upward for a few meters, eventually reaching a dead end where the debris was compressed too tightly, leaving no gaps. There, he simply used Shadow Sense to locate another tiny pocket of empty space nearby and teleported to it, still maintaining the form of a shadow. Just like that, he ascended higher and higher, slowly approaching the surface. In the process, Sonny discovered something remarkable. Now that he could absorb the ambient essence while in the embrace of shadows, the rate at which his own essence was being consumed to keep himself intangible was lower than the rate at which it was being replenished. In other words, Sonny could remain in the form of a shadow indefinitely now, for as long as he stayed away from bright light and true darkness. Amazing! Eventually, he reached another large pocket of space and temporarily assumed corporeal form to look around. By some luck, the level of destruction was much lower here, enough so that there were mostly intact pieces of furniture strewn around the floor, covered in dust. Sonny observed the dark, claustrophobic space for a few moments, then took a step forward and bent down, fishing out a small device from under the dust. It was a standard-issue military communicator, its screen cracked. Nevertheless, the communicator was still working. When Sonny picked it up, the broken screen lit up, revealing a fragmented image. The thing seemed to be malfunctioning, but he could still make out what he needed, the time and date. Staring at the blinking screen, Sonny opened his eyes wide. According to the broken communicator, today was roughly a week since the disastrous battle of the Black Skull. Considering the time the members of the cohort had spent traversing the harrowing desert, the spell sent them back to the exact moment they had entered the Seed of Nightmare. While they were wandering the dreadful depths of the tomb of Ariel, time stood still in the waking world. Sonny let out a long sigh and tossed the broken communicator away. I see. He felt a strange mix of profound relief and tense apprehension. The reason for being relieved was obvious. Sonny did not know how many cycles it had taken them to conquer the nightmare, but from what he had seen in the estuary, it was at least thousands. Therefore, he had been secretly afraid to return to the waking world only to find out that humans there had gone extinct thousands of years ago. That Rain and everyone else he knew were long gone. Alternatively, the strange nature of the great river could have resulted in them leaving the nightmare in the time corresponding to where they were in relation to the estuary, namely, in the Age of Gods, which would have been terrible in its own right. So the fact that their third nightmare had taken no time at all, from the point of view of the waking world, was one of the best possible outcomes. However, it also meant that Sunny and the other members of the cohort had been sent to a continent where an unknown number of great horrors were currently roaming freely. Now that they were saints, did they stand a chance in a battle against the terrifying creatures that had entered the waking world during the Battle of the Black Skull? That was the reason Sunny felt tense. "I wonder if we'll meet Skinwalker again." He smiled somberly and then dissolved into shadows once more. "At least I didn't miss years of Rain's life." Encouraging himself like that, Sunny continued slithering through the ruins. After a while, he finally reached the surface. Sunny found himself on the slope of a vast crater under a stormy gray sky. Even though the situation was more than a little ominous, he suddenly felt a strange sense of comfort. It was a privilege many people never thought about, to have a familiar sky above their heads, to be home. Without wasting any time, Sunny scaled the slope and escaped the embrace of shadows at the top of the tall mound formed by the crater. Standing there, he looked around, at what he had expected to be the ruins of an obliterated siege capital. To his surprise, the siege capital did not look particularly obliterated. Sure, there were signs of destruction here and there, with a few buildings having collapsed, but Valor's stronghold seemed to have sustained the worst damage. Most of the city was still intact, and there were crowds of people moving through the streets in an orderly manner, escorted by the soldiers. As Sunny assessed this scene, two details attracted his attention, both shaking him to the very core. The first one was near the center of the city, where a large park sprawled. There, a giant gate pierced the sky, dwarfing the tallest building in the siege capital. It was like a vertical fracture in the fabric of the world, instilling him with terror. Here too, but why? Then he noticed that there was something strange about the giant gate. It was entirely, utterly wrong. Usually, the gates looked like tears in reality, revealing nothing but vile darkness in their depths. But this one was different. Not only did Sunny not feel an instinctive revulsion toward the strange gate, but there was also no darkness within it. Instead, he could see to the other side. There, clearly visible through the fracture of the gate, a beautiful lake sparkled under bright sunlight, and from that lake rose a magnificent castle. It was Bastion. Sunny was still struggling to comprehend that stunning sight when he noticed something else. There was an orderly column of refugees slowly entering the gate. He shuddered. That is impossible. A nightmare gate was not something one could enter. It was a door that only opened one way from the dream realm into the waking world. Therefore, anyone trying to pass through a gate from that side was destined to fail. More than that, approaching a gate was lethal. Sunny had briefly brushed against one himself in Falcon Scott, and it was a memory he did not wish to revisit. So how could countless refugees be passing through the strange nightmare gate? Was it even a nightmare gate, or something else entirely? The answers to these questions were, perhaps, connected to the second detail Sunny had been stunned to see. And that one was far more chilling. Out there, far away from him, the great wall of the siege capital stood, broken and torn. Long spans of it had collapsed, and beyond them a mountain of black flesh was rolling across the plain, devouring everything in sight. There were no soldiers, no awakened, and no lumbering MWPs on top of the damaged wall. However, there was a single human there, facing the great horror with indifferent resolve. From that distance, Sunny couldn't see who it was exactly. All he could tell was that it was a man. The man was tall, with broad shoulders, his posture as straight and sharp as a steel sword. A long vermilion cloak fluttered in the wind behind his back. The man did not move, but the stormy clouds seemed to follow his will, flowing across the sky. A rustling haze connected the clouds with the crawling mountain of black flesh, as if rain was falling from the sky. That rustle. Sonny looked up, at the clouds that obscured the heavens like a gray veil. And no, it can't be. It was only then that he understood that they were no clouds at all. Instead, they were countless flying swords, enough of them to form a storm front, all moving with clear and hypnotizing, lethal intent. The haze he saw in the distance was not rain, but thousands of swords falling on the colossal abomination like a bombardment of slaying steel, shredding and slicing its profane flesh apart. Sonny paled, forgetting to breathe. He suddenly realized who the man facing the great horror was, what the strange gate was, and why the siege capital had not been destroyed yet. The King of Swords had descended into the waking world, and with him the harrowing might of a sovereign's domain had descended as well. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, staring at the distant figure wearing a bright vermilion cloak. The clouds veiling the sky were not clouds, but a myriad of flying swords. The man standing on the ruined wall of the siege capital was not a mere mortal, but a sovereign. One of the three supreme humans in existence. Anvil of Valor, the King of Swords. The sovereign was facing a great titan. Sonny recognized that harrowing creature from the Battle of the Black Skull, where it had decimated the armies of both valor and song. The titan was vast and abominable, its power inconceivable. But the King of Swords was no less terrifying. He was more like a force of nature than a human being, a walking cataclysm that tolerated no defiance. Where Anvil stood, his will was the law. Wherever his sword pointed was his kingdom. And within the borders of his kingdom, his authority was absolute. Whoever dared to disobey would be obliterated by a flood of slaying swords. Sonny took a stifled breath. Crazy, it's crazy. That was what Nephi's wanted to fight against. He slowly shook his head and forced himself to look away from the awesome visage of the Rain of Swords. If each of them was infused with the power of a supreme being, then Anvil was much more powerful than Sonny had ever imagined. Considering that he was effortlessly controlling enough swords to cover the entire sky, this whole siege capital could be destroyed by the tyrannical sovereign in a matter of seconds. There was no one in the waking world strong enough to stop him. Well, except for the other two, Kai Song and Asterion. Are they here in Antarctica as well? Sonny wondered. The Queen of Worms had to have descended too. As for the most mysterious of the sovereigns who knew, his ways were inscrutable. Finally, his gaze settled on the Titanic gate. A nightmare gate? No, not quite. A dream gate. Something clicked in his mind, and Sonny's eyes widened slightly. Of course, it makes sense. Sonny had been wary of the sovereigns for many years, but he did not really know a lot about them and about their power. What did it mean, exactly, to be supreme? He had learned that the sovereigns possessed a unique ability to create, rule, and expand their domains. Even this piece of information was vague and shallow at best. However, that was not what Sonny was currently thinking about. Rather, he was thinking about a more subtle characteristic of those carrying the nightmare spell. Awakened traveled to the dream realm when they slept. Masters could enter it at will and physically, leaving a tether behind. Saints were like miniature gateways, able to come and go between the two worlds as they pleased, and even carry people with them. What about the sovereigns, then? How did this facet of their power evolve when they rose to the supreme rank? Wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that theirs would be a continuation of the power that all saints possessed? That they would not only contain a gateway within themselves, but would actually be capable of creating a stable external bridge between the two worlds? The opposite of a nightmare gate. Nightmare gates allowed abominations to leave the dream realm and enter the waking world. A dream gate, then, would allow living beings to enter the dream realm from this side. He is evacuating civilians. Indeed, that was what the King of Swords was doing. The evacuation army had spent close to a year ferrying refugees over the dreadful expanse of the ocean to other quadrants. The process was slow. After all, the seafaring alloy behemoths could accommodate only so many people, and it took them more than a month to make a round trip. Not to mention all the dangers that the naval convoys faced at sea. The government had evacuated as many refugees as they could, and the operation would have probably ended in a semblance of success, if not for the three Category 4 gates that had opened during the Battle of the Black Skull. With the great nightmare creatures roaming East Antarctica, there was no hope of anyone surviving. The civilian population, the evacuation army, the small contingents of legacy awakened. All of them were destined to die. East Antarctica would have ended up the same way the Antarctic Center had, with everyone who was not already evacuated perishing in the flood of abominations. And so the two sovereigns must have descended, holding back the great horrors and opening a new, much more efficient path to salvation. The Dream Gates. Perhaps it was because they could not allow their children, Morgan, Satian, Beastmaster, and Silent Stalker, to die. Perhaps it was because Mordred had been right, and the sovereigns could not abandon humanity that easily. The new world they were building in the Dream Realm had to be populated by someone, after all, and hundreds of millions of refugees with nowhere else to go were the perfect fuel for strengthening their domains and nurturing more awakened. In any case, here it was. Antarctica's salvation. Sonny felt both incredibly relieved and indescribably bitter as he looked at the towering Dream Gate. Relieved because his worst fears had not come true, and his mission, the evacuation army's mission, was not doomed to fail. All the sacrifices that he and his soldiers had made were not in vain. At the same time, he felt incredibly bitter because the unexpected salvation had come from those whom he despised the most, the great clans, whose conceited indifference created this terrible situation in the first place. If only they had moved sooner, if only they had not wasted so much time secretly fighting each other, instead of preventing the chain of nightmares from claiming countless lives. He could already see the mighty propaganda machine spinning its wheels, burying the truth in the clamor of triumphant fanfares. Look at the noble heroes of the legacy clans, who had selflessly come to the rescue of the southern quadrant in its darkest moment, just like these faithful guardians of humanity always did. Come to think of it, the sovereigns had finally chosen to reveal their existence. That would also be spun into a fitting tale, no doubt. Probably something about the champions of the two great clans rushing to conquer the fourth nightmare in order to assist the people of Antarctica. That would also explain why they had been so late to offer genuine support. They had not been tardy at all, but had instead been risking their lives in a nightmare. A dark expression appeared on Sonny's face. I hate it. But at the same time, he couldn't hate it. As long as people were saved, did the hypocrisy of the sovereigns really matter? Of course, he still had many questions. Would all these refugees be infected by the nightmare spell as soon as they entered the dream realm? What were the limitations that made it difficult for the sovereigns to enter the waking world, and how had they bypassed these limitations to appear in Antarctica? How would the world change now that the existence of the Supremes was revealed, and millions of mundane people crossed over to the dream realm? And so on. Well, he could take his time finding the answers to all these questions. For now, the situation did not seem critical. With Anvil holding down the fort, the siege capital was not on the verge of being destroyed. Judging by how orderly the soldiers and the civilians were moving, the situation was under control, or at least not critical. Therefore, Sonny's first priority was to find the members of the cohort. Since he had been sent back to where his tether had been placed in the waking world, the rest of them would be, too. Which meant that Mordred and Jet had been sent to the siege capital controlled by Song, while Effie and Kai had been sent to the evacuation army headquarters. Nephi's and Cassie, though, were supposed to be right here, probably somewhere in the same ruins he had just crawled from. Taking a deep breath, Sonny looked around, studying the crater. It was then that he was thrown to the ground, and a massive explosion tore the center of the crater apart. The ground shook, and some parts of the crater's slope collapsed. Sonny, who was standing on the edge of its mound, lost his balance and rolled down, dirt and pieces of debris raining on him from above. Ouch! Coming to a halt much further down the slope than he had been before, he could not see the Dream Gate and the King of Swords anymore. What he could see, however, was a towering pillar of white flame rising from the torn depths of the wide crater. It moved and twisted as if alive, as though a giant made from pure flame was stretching its shoulders after being trapped underground for a long time. For a moment, Sonny was entranced, thinking that he could make out the shape of a winged being woven from dancing flame, hidden in the depths of the incandescent pillar. Then the whirlwind of flame collapsed on itself and slowly formed into a humanoid figure. The radiant being looked like a beautiful, pure spirit of immaculate light. Her graceful body contrasted against the dark soil of the deep crater. With wide wings spread behind her like a blinding mantle, she slowly glided down. The moment her feet touched the ground, it started to melt. Slowly, the brilliance of her skin grew dimmer and was then extinguished. Without the blinding light, Sonny could finally see who had just escaped the ruins. Of course, he had already guessed who it was. It was Nephi's. She looked just like the last time he had seen her, but also different. Not only because the white metal of the Starlight Legion armor was torn and scorched, breached in half a dozen places, and not only because her presence seemed to illuminate the world, so much stronger and tantalizing than it had been before, and not even because she had grown even more beautiful after undergoing the rebirth of transcendence. No, it was because Nephi's had wings. A pair of white wings extended from her back, looking too majestic and pure to be a part of this mortal world. Sonny stared enthralled. Partial transformation. There were transformation abilities that had several steps to them. From the looks of it, Neph's had at least three: the winged form, the brilliant spirit of light whose radiant body seemed to contain an ocean of furious flame, and the vast mass of unleashed fire that could seemingly assume any form or no form at all. At least that was what Sonny surmised after catching a glimpse of Neph's striking arrival. There had to be more to this transformation, of course. Sonny doubted that a divine aspect would be limited to enhancing one's might and granting one the ability to fly. He stared for a few more moments, then sighed. Well, I can ask her later. For now, Sonny had to do something very unpleasant. Namely, explain himself. What was one supposed to say after leaving his partner to face the last challenge of a dreadful nightmare alone? Sorry, I had to step out to break fate really quick. He winced, not looking forward to that conversation at all. Shaking his head, Sonny stood up and spent a moment evaluating his appearance through the shadows. He would lie if he said that he wasn't apprehensive about his looks at the moment. Becoming transcendent had improved his body once again, after all. So, he was certain that he was now reasonably attractive. Even though it was a bit childish, he wanted Nephi's to see him in the best possible light the first time they met after escaping the tomb of Ariel. Sadly, it did not really matter. No matter how beautiful the transcendence had made him, it was impossible to tell what he looked like right now, because Sonny was completely covered in dirt, dust, and soot. His face was almost entirely hidden beneath a layer of grime. Ah, curses! He hastily rubbed his face, but only managed to spread the dirt around. Goddammit! It was too late, however, because that movement attracted Neph's attention. She turned her head and looked at him, her eyes shining with radiant white light. Sonny smiled nervously, then hesitated and took a step in her direction. He had more than one reason to feel nervous. There were the complicated intricacies of his relationship with Nephi's and the consequences of the choice he had made, yes. But there was also the reason he had made that choice. His connection to the nightmare spell was gone, and his faded attribute was also gone. What about Shadow Bond? As Sonny walked, considering what he would say, Nephi spoke in a calm, even tone. Stop. He took a couple more steps and froze, stunned. First, because she had broken her promise once again and given him an order. And second, because he had not felt compelled to follow that order. It was gone. The connection between him and Nephi's was gone. Even though Sonny had stopped, it was of his own volition. When she told him to do so, there was nothing forcing him to stop walking. Nothing had overwritten his personal will. Nothing had violated his freedom and agency. Even though he had received a direct command, there was no reaction at all. Sonny took a shaky breath. It worked. An involuntary smile found its way onto his face. I'm free. Sonny had been a bit scared to face Nephi's after abandoning her at Verge, but he was much more scared that his decision to leave had been for nothing. That would have been a really, really bitter pill to swallow. But luckily, it had not been in vain. Everything had worked just as promised. Faded was gone. The chain of shadow bond wrapped around his neck was gone as well. His wish had come true. His smile widened, refusing to go away, which was a bit awkward, considering the nature of the conversation they were about to have. Sonny opened his mouth, trying to say something. But Nephi's beat him to it. Looking at him coldly, she frowned slightly and asked, "Who are you?" There was no hint of recognition in her voice. Identify yourself. Identify yourself. Sonny's smile froze. His body froze too. For a moment he was utterly confused, doubting that he had heard Nephi's correctly. But there was no doubt, her voice was very clear. Identify yourself. What is she doing giving me the cold shoulder? He could understand if she was angry at him because of what had happened on the cold shores of Verge. Resentful, even. But still, wasn't it too childish to pretend as if she did not know him? Sonny tried to calm down, but at the same time, he knew that he was deceiving himself. Nephi's was not the kind of person to lash out by treating him as a stranger. She just genuinely did not recognize him. How can it be? Well, to be fair, he was indeed covered in dust and dirt from head to bottom. It was easy to mistake him for someone else. No, was it? It might have been for someone else, but not for Nephi's. She knew him far too well for that, not to mention that he was wearing a rather unique suit of armor. There was no mistaking the onyx mantle. Sonny hesitated, not knowing what to say. But he had to say something, because the pressure of the flaw was building, forcing him to answer. It's me, Sonny. His voice sounded strangely lost. Neff's frown deepened slightly. Your affiliation. Petrified and feeling his hair stand on end, Sonny answered stiffly. Evacuation Army, I guess. Army Command Special Envoy. What was going on? What was happening? As Sonny was balancing on the edge of mental collapse, desperately trying to keep the emotions from showing on his face, Nephi's nodded. It seemed that she accepted his explanation easily. She looked around, then opened her mouth to say something, possibly to ask what was going on, what date it was, and what state the southern quadrant was in. But then her expression changed, and she turned slightly, as if listening to a distant sound. Cassie. A moment later, Nephi's dashed away and plunged her hands into the slope of the crater. Her beautiful white wings spread, and with a barely audible gasp, she pulled a massive alloy plate from under the ground. The plate itself must have weighed many tons, and with the added weight of all the soil and debris piled on top, It should have taken titanic strength to raise it. But that was exactly the kind of strength Nephi's possessed. Straining her slender body, she gritted her teeth and tossed the massive plate of torn alloy to the side. It landed a dozen meters away from them, making the whole crater shake and raising a cloud of dust into the air. Then Nephi's jumped down into the ruins below, leaving Sunny alone for a few moments. He gasped for air, suffocating. Fate, the thieving bird stole my fate. But what did it mean to have his fate stolen? In simple terms, it meant that the loathsome miscreant had taken all the countless strings of fate that bound Sunny and tore them away, leaving Sunny entirely free of their shackles. However, those shackles were also what made Sunny the person he was, and what connected him to all other living beings, as well as to the world itself. He suddenly remembered a thought that had visited him once, in the depths of a nightmare. As one went through life, they collected strings and tethers that connected them to others. Everyone's fates were intertwined, and everyone was tied down and bound by those numerous connections, some of them fleeting, some deep and precious. Sunny, too, was tethered to the world that way. Or rather, he had been. By proclaiming that he wanted to break fate, that he wished to be free of its chains. Had he not proclaimed his desire to set himself free from these tethers, as well? His mouth was suddenly terribly dry. Taking a step back, Sunny swayed and almost fell down. His face was as pale as that of a ghost. Be careful of what you wish for. A disbelieving chuckle escaped from his lips. He should have known that there would be a price to pay. No, he had known. Of course he knew, but he stubbornly pressed forward anyway. To gain freedom. Well, now he had gained it. He had liberated himself, not just from fate but from everything. When the vile thieving bird stole the strings of fate wrapped around him, it also tore his very existence from the tapestry of fate. And so, his existence was erased from the fabric of the world. His fated attribute was gone. His connection to the nightmare spell was gone. And much more importantly, he had lost his true name as well, because true names were innately tied to one's fate. That was why Nephi's could not command him anymore. Everything about his aspect remained intact, including his innate ability, Shadow Bond. Find a worthy master and let them know your true name. Once they recite it out loud, you will be bound to their will, unable to disobey any command. It is improper for a shadow, let alone a divine one, to walk around without a master. Shadow Bond had not disappeared. It was just that Sunny did not have a true name anymore, and therefore its condition could not be fulfilled. The bond formed between him and Nephi's was broken, and no one else was going to be able to enslave him, ever again. Because a fateless being could not earn a true name. Sunny was truly and utterly free. But at what cost? The memories of his existence had been erased from the world. Be careful of what you wish for. Sunny fell to the ground and looked up, at the gray sky drowning in the flood of rustling swords. After a while, a terrible smile split his face like a jagged chasm. Taking a shallow breath, he laughed bitterly and whispered, "I'm free." Winter had grasped the streets of NQSC with frigid fingers, making people on the streets shiver from the chill and hurry to get inside. The sky was distant and cold, full of icy clouds. In one of the more prosperous districts of the city, a splendid-looking young man was sitting on a rusty bench, cradling a cup of luxurious plant-based coffee in his hand. Despite being dressed in light clothes, he didn't seem to be bothered by the cold. In fact, he looked like nothing in this world could bother him. The people rushing past the park couldn't help but throw furtive glances at the young man. His expensive clothes, lithe figure, alabaster skin, gleaming onyx eyes, and lustrous raven-black hair, but most of all, the aura of confidence and subdued power emanating from him, made the young man look out of place. It was as if he belonged in a marble palace, instead of this small and bleak park. Taking a sip of his coffee, Sonny grimaced and shook his head. "And still bitter." Standing up, he tossed the empty cup into a trash bin and crossed the street. There, a convenience store invited potential customers to come inside with a colorful sign. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and did just that. The bell fixed above the door rang melodiously, announcing his arrival to the clerk. Ignoring the clerk who was staring at him with wide eyes, Sonny looked around the modest store. There were all kinds of food items on the shelves, from cheap synth-paste rations to more extravagant natural snacks. This district was mostly visited by a somewhat affluent crowd, so there was a lot to choose from. That said, Sonny did not really know what to buy. Despite having been an affluent person himself once, he had rarely visited stores like this. Most of his time had been spent in the dream realm, anyway, and here in the waking world, he would usually either eat at the academy or cook something up back home. Ahem. Sonny stared at the shelves for a while, then turned to the window, where a small dining surface was arranged for those who wanted to grab a quick bite right here in the store. Currently, there was only one person sitting in front of the window. It was a pretty young woman in a neat school uniform, who was absent-mindedly eating cup ramen while studying the screen of her communicator with a serious expression. She had pale skin and black hair, just like him. In fact, one could even say that the two of them looked quite alike. Sonny cleared his throat and then asked in a neutral tone, "Hey, what's good here?" The girl was distracted from her communicator and turned to him, still engrossed in whatever it was she had been reading. "What?" Then she froze, looking at him with wide eyes. Sonny sighed, already accustomed to such reactions. It had already been a bit bothersome before he transcended, but now that he was a saint, mundane humans were often startled by his appearance. He smiled politely. "I asked what you would recommend. Is that one good?" He pointed to her meal. The girl nodded, acting a little bashful. "Ah, yes, sir." "Sir, well, it's better than brat, I guess." Sonny nodded and went on to purchase himself the same type of cup ramen. Pouring boiling water into the cup, he sat down on the chair next to the young woman. There were only 2 chairs there, to be fair, and looked into the window. He was unperturbed, but she seemed to be feeling awkward. After a few moments of silence, the girl asked in a shy tone, "Can I ask, sir, are you an awakened?" Sonny glanced at her, then opened the steaming cup of ramen and picked up his chopsticks. "Oh, sure." He enjoyed the spicy smell, then slurped a generous portion of noodles and chewed them with visible delight. "Wow, you weren't lying. This one is really good." The girl stared at him strangely, and then suddenly asked in a hesitant tone, "I'm sorry, but do I know you?" Sonny looked at her and remained silent for a few long moments. Then he lightly shook his head. No, I don't think you do. I mean, why would you? I'm quite a memorable person, actually. I doubt someone would easily forget meeting me, in normal circumstances." While she looked away in embarrassment, Sonny shrugged. "Why do you ask?" The girl shook her head. "No, it's just that you look familiar, sir. I must have mistook you for someone." Sonny studied her for a couple more seconds, then turned away. "Don't worry, I won't hold it against you." He returned to his food while the young woman finished hers. They didn't speak again for a while, but then Sonny suddenly asked, "Are you a local here in NQSC?" The girl looked at him in surprise. Sure. Although I'll be moving soon. My dad, he works for the government, so with everything that is going on, he is being sent to a new post. We'll be leaving in a few months." Sonny sighed. "Ah, I see. Actually, I'll be leaving on a long journey soon, too." He smiled and put his chopsticks down, then added in a strangely wistful tone, "Because I'm far away from home." Sonny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head and stood up. "Well, anyway, Thanks for the recommendation. I'll be sure to repay you when we meet again." The young woman looked at him in confusion. And as she did, a dark serpent flowed from her shadow into the young man's shadow, unnoticed. At the same time, the shadow of the young man split in two. One remained glued to him, while the other glided across the floor, hesitated for a moment and hid in the girl's shadow, replacing the dark serpent. Sunny said a silent goodbye to the happy shadow and smiled. "Stay safe, Rain. I'll see you around." With that, he headed for the door. Startled, Rain rose from her seat and called out, "Wait, sir, how do you know my name?" But the strange awakened was already gone. The bell hanging above the door remained silent, yet the young man was nowhere to be seen. It was as if he had never been there at all. All that remained was an empty cup of noodles and lingering feeling of unexplainable familiarity, and the vivid memory of their odd first meeting. Sunny stepped out of the shadows a few hundred meters away and sighed, looking up. It was time to leave. White snow was falling slowly from the lonesome gray sky. End of Part 3, Well of Wishes. End of Volume 7, The Tomb of Ariel. There was a rustle, and a gentle breeze caressed Sunny's face. He awoke slowly, allowing himself to enjoy the sweet moments of comfort and peace that dwelled on the edge between dream and wakefulness. His bed was soft, warm, and cozy. Today, it was especially hard to abandon its familiar embrace. After a while, he sighed and opened his eyes. The sun was yet to rise, but the sky outside his window had already started to brighten. The wind blowing from the lake made the curtains flutter, filling the modest bedroom with the delightful smell of freshness. Even after all these years, Sunny was still sometimes startled at how clean and pure the air of the dream realm was. He took a few deep breaths, rubbed his face, and rose from the bed. His room was not very large and not very luxurious. However, it was very cozy. There was a bed, a nightstand, a case with various books crowding the shelves, a writing desk, and a simple dresser. The furniture was made out of natural wood, crafted with affection and care. There were a few decorations added here and there, as well as plenty of signs of the room being well lived in. Well, of course it was. He had been spending his nights here for a long time after all. Putting on simple clothes and summoning the nebulous mantle, Sunny yawned, tied his hair back, and left the bedroom. He splashed some water in his face, then went to the kitchen and brewed himself a large cup of strong, fragrant coffee. Finally, holding the steaming mug, he left the house and sat down on the porch, intending to enjoy his coffee while watching the sun rise. It was rather hard to get his hands on coffee beans in the dream realm, but today, Sunny wanted to pamper himself. It was his birthday after all. He was turning 26. Of course, no one in the world knew that. Taking the first sip of his coffee, Sunny smiled slightly and looked up. A few of the brightest stars could still be seen, shining in the pale lavender expanse of the morning sky. Just at that moment, the gentle sun finally crested the dark line of the distant horizon, imbuing the sky with a beautiful golden radiance. The soft twilight of dawn was imbued with a hint of bright daylight. He watched the sun rise while enjoying his coffee. Despite the beautiful sight, Sunny felt a bit of melancholy. He looked down with a wistful smile. "I am older than Mom was when she passed now." It was a strange feeling. When Sunny was a child, his mother was the definition of an adult to him, and adults were magical creatures who possessed wondrous and incredible powers. But now he was an adult himself, which was why he was able to realize that his mother had been a kid herself. She was gone, but both her children were alive and doing well. There was precious solace and consolation in that fact, so Sunny did not feel too sad. Well, alive was a given, but he wasn't too sure about doing well. During these last 4 years, he had gone through a long, rough patch and had even done a few very stupid things. Still, it was looking better now. This peaceful morning he was able to enjoy was proof. Sipping on coffee, Sunny watched as sunlight finally reached the lake and reflected on its clear surface. The lake was vast and picturesque, so calm that its surface was like a mirror. A grandiose, magnificent white castle rose from the lake, with vermilion flags fluttering on its many towers. It almost seemed too beautiful to be real, like something from a fairy tale. But of course, it was truly there. The beautiful castle of white stone was Bastion, the great citadel of Clan Valor, where the King of Swords held his court. It was also the heart of a populous city that had grown around the lake in the last 4 years. After the sovereigns had revealed themselves, most of the remaining civilian population of the southern quadrant, around 200 million people, was evacuated directly to the Dream Realm, divided between Bastion and Ravenheart, and gradually funneled into lesser citadels. Later, the Dream Gates were opened in the other quadrants, and even more mundane people received a chance to relocate into the Dream Realm. Even if few understood the true meaning of these events, the gradual exodus of humanity from the waking world had already begun. For now, most of those who left were from the fringes of society, people who did not possess citizenship, and therefore did not receive their share of the scarce resources needed to live a proper life on the dying earth. But Sunny knew more than most. He had no doubt that, sooner or later, everyone would leave if they were given enough time. As the years passed, the situation in the waking world would gradually turn worse and worse. There would be more nightmare gates, more powerful nightmare creatures, and less space for humans to exist, until the entire world was swallowed by the Dream Realm. Granted, humanity was growing stronger too. The chain of nightmares had been like a turning point in history. Before, the number of awakened in the world was relatively limited. There were 100,000 awakened or so, a few hundred masters and a few dozen saints. After Antarctica, these numbers changed. By now, there must have been no less than 1 million awakened out there, with several thousands of masters and more than 100 saints guiding them all to fight against the nightmare creatures. The balance of power that had been maintained for decades was finally broken, and humanity set out on the path of no return. There were hundreds of millions of mundane humans residing in the Dream Realm, too. Many lived in the sprawling cities surrounding the 3 great citadels, but most had settled across the lesser citadels scattered around the human-controlled regions of this dangerous world. Dozens of towns had popped up here and there, all developing swiftly. Of course, life in the Dream Realm was not easy, and people had to go through a period of adjustment before becoming accustomed to this new, harsh reality. But since most of them were either refugees or from the outskirts of the overcrowded siege capitals, they were no strangers to discomfort. Instead, the lives of many had only improved after leaving the waking world behind. They could not return anyway, or rather, they could not return without risking their lives. The moment a mundane human entered the Dream Realm, a seed of nightmare was planted into their soul. However, that seed would not bloom, summoning them into the first nightmare, unless one of 2 conditions had been met. One of the conditions was stepping back into the waking world. The other was leaving the territory of the domain to which they had pledged their loyalty. As long as the sovereigns willed it, their mundane subjects were protected from the ravages of the nightmare spell. This was another reason why the number of awakened had increased so much in the last 4 years. Those who wished to challenge the first nightmare could simply request it from the great clans instead of waiting to be infected by the spell. Many of them even survived. Sunny took another sip of coffee and turned his head, looking at the lively city that had grown around the beautiful, calm lake. Of course, it could not be compared to a vast human hive like NQSC. However, there was still a startling amount of people here, at least 12 million of them or so. Another 1 or 2 million lived in the castle itself. Building a city like that in a short amount of time was a great undertaking, but with thousands of awakened participating in the construction, all possessing inhuman strength and powerful aspects, it happened surprisingly quickly. Now, the city looked neat and tidy, with 2- or 3-storied houses lined along lovely streets. The houses were built from white stone, their roofs covered by colorful red tiles. There was plenty of trees and greenery, as well, with parks, gardens, and water features placed harmoniously here and there. Modern technology might have been hard to use in the dream realm, but nothing prevented the city planners and architects from using the vast accumulated knowledge of humanity and all the processing power of the waking world to do all the preparatory work in advance. In short, Bastion looked very pretty and picturesque. It was also usually quite lively. This early in the morning, however, most people were still asleep, which was why Sonny was able to enjoy his coffee surrounded by peaceful silence. Oh, he owned a house in Bastion as well. More than that, it was a house many would be jealous of. Although not as prestigious as being able to live in the castle itself, his property was on the very shore of the lake, with its back windows opening straight to the water. It was an elegant one-story cottage, which was seemingly built from brown bricks, with a sloping tiled roof and a tall chimney. There was a small garden in the back and a neat lawn in front of it, with herbs and flowers growing in ceramic pots. Since it was situated at the end of the street, few people ever passed by. If they did pass by, however, they would have seen a modest sign hanging above the door of the cottage. It read, Sonny's Brilliant Emporium, Cafe and Memory Boutique. As the city was slowly waking up, Sonny finished his coffee and leaned back, enjoying his last moments of peace. He did not have a lot of regular customers, but there were some. They were probably going to start arriving soon, which meant that he would be busy for the next few hours. Before that, however, he glanced at his shadow, his gaze becoming distant for a moment. Then a familiar voice whispered into his ear. You have slain a great demon. Your shadow grows stronger. It was his own voice. Sonny brushed his fingers across the black bracelet on his left wrist and slowly exhaled. The bracelet was a memory he had created a while back. It was a crude knockoff of the spell, replacing some of its simplest functions. Announcing his kills was one of them. He shifted slightly. That went better than expected. He had just killed a great demon. Well, technically, it was his other self that had done it. His avatars were not beholden to the maximum range of shadow control, so there was a vast distance between them. Currently, Sonny was simultaneously in 3 separate locations. His original body was here in Bastion, enjoying a peaceful life in the company of the gloomy shadow. He had kept that guise so that people had no reason to ask why he was walking around without a shadow at all. His second self was incarnated by the happy shadow, keeping an eye on Rain. His last avatar was far away, in one of the most dangerous regions of the dream realm, incarnated by the haughty shadow. Haughty, naughty, creepy, and crazy were together. Saint, fiend, serpent, and nightmare were with them as well. Unlike the first two, the third Sonny knew no peace. He wielded the most power of the 3 and spent his days in eternal darkness, often clashing with dreadful abominations. Of course, the 3 of them were actually one person. So Sonny had been enjoying a peaceful morning in Bastion, accompanying Rain, and battling the great demon at the same time, all along. But he had grown good at compartmentalizing over the years, allowing him to at least pretend to live 3 separate lives. So that thing is finally dead, huh? It had taken him almost a month of meticulous preparations to finally attack the abomination in its lair. Sonny had expected to sustain heavy injuries, but the battle ended well. With the demon's death, there was no one left to challenge him in the immediate vicinity of the temple. Sonny lingered for a moment, then summoned the runes. A field of familiar symbols appeared in front of him. The runes themselves might have been the same, but they looked a bit differently. He had designed this whole thing himself, after all, tying the enchantment to his memory, perception, and the black bracelet. So, Sunny had taken liberties to change the look and feel of the field of runes to his taste. The runes read: Name Sunless, True Name, Rank Transcendent, Class Terror, Shadow Cores 6/7, Shadow Fragments 1591/6000. His true name had been lost in the tomb of Ariel, and he could not earn another while banished from fate. As for his shadow fragments, seeing the measly number which had been very slow to increase in the past 4 years, made Sunny a bit disheartened. But there was nothing he could do about it. He had slaughtered countless nightmare creatures after becoming a saint. Their blood would have been enough to fill the lake's surrounding bastion. The problem was, his soul only grew stronger when he killed corrupted and great abominations, which were not that easy to find, and harder still to survive. So he had only managed to slay a mere 1,000 of those or so. Of course, if anyone heard Sunny being disappointed about only killing 1,000 corrupted and great nightmare creatures, they would have slapped him across the face. But for him, it was a sign that he would not be able to become a titan anytime soon, unless he found some shadow creatures to hunt at least. Sadly, Sunny had not discovered any in all these years. It seemed that shadow creatures had gone entirely extinct during or soon after the Doom War. Come to think of it, discounting Fiend, he had never encountered a corrupted shadow creature. Were there none, or had they remained somewhere far away, in a place that he wasn't able to find yet? Shaking his head, he glanced back at the runes. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Extraordinary Rock, Endless Spring, Weaver's Mask, Shadow Lantern, Shadow Chair, Overpriced Saddle, Weaver's Needle, Nebulous Mantle, Handy Bracelet, Quintessence Pearl. There was no surprise there. Sunny made his living by creating memories, but strangely enough, he was not in a hurry to create many memories for himself. He did not need to seek power in them, because he himself possessed tremendous power. With Onyx Mantle and Soul Serpent, most of his needs were met. Which was not to say that Sunny did not plan to forge himself new equipment in the future. It was just that what he wanted to create was too ambitious to be crafted in a hurry, and he had only opened up his shop a year ago. For now, the only memories he crafted for himself were the Quintessence Pearl, which was basically an improved version of the destroyed Essence Pearl, and the Handy Bracelet, the poor replacement for the spell. He also modified Anank's mantle a bit, renaming it the Nebulous Mantle in the process. The Quintessence Pearl and the Handy Bracelet were simply for convenience, but the last one was of vital importance for him. After all, it was the Nebulous Mantle that allowed him to live in Bastion, pretending to be a mere master. If people found out that the humble shopkeeper was a saint, things would become complicated. Sunny turned back to the runes. Echoes, Shadows, Onyx Saint, Soul Serpent, Nightmare, Shadow Fiend, Marvelous Mimic. The Marvelous Mimic was what Sunny had called the latest of his shadows, which was created from the modified Covetous Coffer and the shadow of the Mordant Mimic. It was the only shadow that he kept with himself in Bastion, instead of sending it to his third avatar. The reason was that he needed it. It was next to him right now, actually. The unassuming brick cottage where his shop was located was, in fact, not a cottage. It was the Marvelous Mimic, who had taken the shape of a picturesque house. Its interior existed in a separate dimension, which allowed Sunny to hide a lot of things below ground. His house could also walk, swim, shapeshift, devour intruders, and produce soul coins, among other things. Sunny had lost his home in NQSC after his existence was erased from the tapestry of fate, so he made sure that his new home would be able to follow him wherever he went. Smiling faintly, he glanced back at the runes. They read: Attributes, Lord of Shadows, Flame of Divinity, Blood Weave, Bone Weave, Soul Weave, Onyx Shell, Fateless. The Master of Shadows had evolved into the Lord of Shadows during his transcendence. Its description was succinct. Shadows recognize you as their ruler. With it, all his abilities had been strengthened and enhanced. The range of his shadow control was now north of 40 kilometers, and he could extend his shadow sense just as far. He could remain the form of an incorporeal shadow indefinitely and cover great distances with each shadow step. The depths and intricacy of what he could manifest wild shadows into had also increased tremendously. In short, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call Sunny a demigod. Or rather, to call his third avatar a demigod. This version of Sunny was just a modest master with a utility aspect who ran a cafe and sold memories from time to time. All people could call him was harmless. Speaking of running a cafe, the customers would be arriving soon. Sunny smiled and took a last look at the runes. Aspect Shadow Slave. Aspect Rank Divine. Innate Ability Shadow Bond. Master. Aspect Abilities Shadow Control, Shadow Step, Shadow Manifestation, Shadow Incarnation. Aspect Legacy Shadow Dance. Flaw Clear Conscience. There was another string at the very end of the field as well. It read, Citadel, Nameless Temple. Those words did not mean that Sunny was anchored in a citadel called the Nameless Temple. They meant that he owned it. It was his citadel which he had personally conquered and claimed. That was where his third avatar was, and that was the reason he had to kill that great demon. After becoming the lord of a citadel, Sunny also became rather territorial. No nightmare creature was allowed to exist in the vicinity of his temple, because there was already an apex predator living there, preparing for the moment when the death zone turned into. Well, anyway, that was for his third avatar to worry about. This Sunny had nothing to do with it. Dismissing the runes, he stood up and stretched. It was time to open the shop. Before Sunny went inside, he lingered for a few moments and glanced at the magnificent castle one last time. Then, he slowly looked up. Out there, high above the tallest tower of Bastion and slightly to the side, a beautiful island was hovering in the sky, bathed in the golden light of dawn. A great pagoda of pristine white stone rose from it, just as majestic as the colossal ancient fortress. The Ivory Tower. The wandering citadel looked harmonious, drifting above Bastion like a satellite. In recent years, its lady and her warriors had been sent to defend remote human enclaves on countless occasions, their fame and renown growing with each improbable victory. The image of the immaculate white tower was slowly becoming a symbol of hope for those besieged by nightmare creatures in the sword domain. Which was more than a little bit fitting. Sunny looked at the ivory tower for a few moments, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. Then, he averted his eyes and sighed. She has been in Bastion for almost a month now. That is unusual. I thought Anvil would send her to some other godforsaken battlefield by now. With that, he went to enter the cottage. Before he could, however, there was a sound of unhurried steps approaching from further down the street. Turning his head, Sunny saw a petite young woman with short dark hair walking over. She looked sleepy, covering a yawn with a small palm. Unlike most awakened, the young woman stubbornly clung to wearing modern clothes. Her black slacks and white blouse, admittedly, did not stand out in the eclectic fashion of Bastion. Here, one was just as likely to meet a person wearing a stylish business suit as a person clad in enchanted armor. The former was even more in vogue, considering that it took some effort to transport material possessions from the other side. The young woman stopped and stared at him sullenly. "Hey, boss." Sunny smiled. "Hey, Aiko, it's a wonderful morning, isn't it?" Her expression did not change, but her gaze turned even darker. A moment later, Aiko looked away and sighed bitterly. "I still don't understand why you insist on opening so early. The sun is not even up yet, for the love of gods." Chuckling, Sunny opened the door. He had found Aiko shortly after returning to civilization, which happened about a year ago. Back then, The young woman was barely making ends meet. According to her, her memory shop went out of business because the main inventory supplier disappeared somewhere in Antarctica. It was a curious thing. Aiko seemed to remember that she had had a partner, and even that her partner had been responsible for providing the memories for the shop. However, her memories were vague at best, and her attention seemed to wander away every time she tried to concentrate on who that partner had been, exactly. She would even forget trying to recollect the details, switching to thinking about something else. That was how the world covered the glaring hole in existence where Sunny used to be. No one remembered that he had existed, and for events that were too important to be entirely forgotten, a vague and abstract substitute took his place. Just some guy, an inconsequential stranger, a fleeting acquaintance, a comrade who had perished long ago, their face and voice erased from memory by the passage of time. People vaguely recognized that someone had been there, side by side with them, but as soon as they concentrated on these memories, their minds naturally wandered to other matters. The same went for the material traces he had left in the world. There was that famous movie, for example, The Devil of Antarctica. It had been inspired by his actions during the Southern Campaign. People knew that the main character was based on a real person, but were incapable of thinking deeply about who that person was. So they just assumed that the main character was a representation of the collective heroism of countless soldiers who had perished in Antarctica. Oh, Sonny was dead officially. Not that anyone knew or remembered. Therefore, his citizenship status had been revoked, his accounts frozen, and his house in NQSC resold. In short, not only had everyone forgotten him, but they were even incapable of becoming aware of having forgotten him. His smile turned brittle. In any case, Aiko had been reluctant to pledge her allegiance to the legacy clans or the government. She had lost her job as Kai's manager when he enlisted, and the brilliant emporium was on the verge of going bankrupt. That was when Sonny found her and purchased the ownership of his own business back from her. After all, although the countless nightmare creatures he had slaughtered while aimlessly wandering the dream realm had not given him a lot of shadow fragments, they had provided him with numerous soul shards. He was secretly an extremely wealthy person. Since Sonny needed a capable manager to help him run the emporium, he hired Aiko once again. Now she was playing the role of his assistant, as well as, begrudgingly, assistant cook. Come on, the early risers will be here soon. The two of them went to the spacious kitchen and started preparing for the day. Sunny was preparing the ingredients, while Aiko went over the books with a frown on her face. Boss, we are running low on most ingredients. You need to make a trip to the waking world soon. Boss, we are not making enough money. We only sold one memory in the last 2 months. What even is the point of calling ourselves a memory boutique? Give me some funds for a marketing campaign, I'm begging you. Boss, there will be a delivery from the beast farm later today. I still have bruises from dealing with them the last time. You do the honors. Listening to Aiko nagging, Sonny let out a sigh. Running a business wasn't easy, especially while dealing with crafted memories and desperately trying to not attract Clan Valor's attention. As he was almost done with the preparatory work, the first customer finally arrived. It was a familiar face. It was still very early in the morning, so the streets of Bastion were mostly empty. However, someone had already come to the brilliant emporium. As the door opened, a melodious sound spread through the interior of the marvelous mimic. There was a beautiful silver bell affixed above the door, its soft and pleasing ringing welcoming the entering customers. Of course, it was the sonorous silver bell. Sonny looked up from what he was doing, then wiped his hands on his apron and left the kitchen. There was an elderly gentleman standing at the door, dressed in a patchy enchanted robe. He had messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes, and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to have a life of their own. Sonny suppressed a smile. "Awaken, Julius, you are here early." The old man looked at him and smiled politely. "Ah, Master Sunless, well, I am a night owl, plus you know what they say, the early bird gets the worm. Wait, I am mixing metaphors." He hesitated for a moment, then coughed. "Sorry, I seem to remember that you dislike birds. In any case, it is nice to see you on this pleasant morning." Sunny nodded. "Likewise the usual." As the old man assumed his favorite spot near the window, Sunny returned to the kitchen. There, he went about making coffee for his former teacher, while at the same time preparing a light breakfast. "We are running low on coffee beans indeed. I'll have to visit NQSC this week, won't I?" While brilliant Emporium could not contend with more prestigious restaurants in Bastion, hot beverages like coffee, tea, and hot chocolate were Sunny's selling point. That was because he exclusively used the pure water from the endless spring to brew them, which made each cup especially invigorating. He ground the beans, poured the fragrant powder and a little sugar into a copper sieve, then sent a wisp of essence into the stove and placed the sieve on the fire. The stove had been created by him, by revering the enchantment of a long-destroyed charm of his, memory of fire, which made kitchen work much easier. When the ground coffee heated a little, he took the endless spring off the shelf, poured water into the sieve, and placed it back on the fire. Ideally, he should have been using a pan of heated sand instead of open fire, but oh well, there were limits to how fancy Sunny was willing to be. While the coffee was brewing, he ignited a second flame and put a pan on it. Then, Sunny opened the icebox and took out a few eggs, butter, and a jar of milk. The icebox had also been created and enchanted by him, in the best attempt to imitate the luxurious refrigerator he had greatly enjoyed owning in the past. In fact, it was more of a large cabinet than a box, made out of natural wood instead of synthwood. So, in a sense, it was even more luxurious. There was no ice inside, either. Instead, the enchantment was the reverse of another charm he had lost, memory of ice. There was a luminous enchantment, too, activated when the door of the cabinet was open. A third enchantment created a dedicated reserve of essence that powered the first two, so Sunny just had to replenish it once every few months. Breaking the eggs with one hand and putting butter on the pan with the other, Sunny mixed the eggs while slowly blending milk in and poured the resulting mass into the melted butter. He waited for the omelet to set, then effortlessly flipped and folded it, finally adding some mushrooms, vegetables, and ham. Well, monster ham to be precise. Soon, a perfectly cooked omelet and a cup of fragrant coffee were ready. Putting them on a tray, Sunny glanced at Aiko, who was still going over the books, and left the kitchen once more. Placing the plate and the cup in front of Teacher Julius, he curiously glanced at the book the old man was reading. Its cover was hidden by a leather jacket, but he knew the title from a glance. It was the exploration report on the tomb of Ariel by Nobody. Sunny was the nobody in question, of course. Even though he had lost credit for his previous academic papers, it seemed like a shame to just leave all the knowledge he had accumulated in the third nightmare go to waste. So, even knowing that it would cause some problems, he published a research paper anonymously. He kept the existence of the plagues and everything he discovered in the estuary to himself, though concentrating on the unique culture of the river civilization, and especially on the stories of weave he had heard from Anik instead. Not only because there were some things that were better left unsaid, but also because some knowledge was simply too dangerous to share. There were very few people in the world who could withstand a mere mention of the forgotten god anyway, while many could be harmed by being exposed to it. However, even with these redacted parts, his report had caused a furor in academic circles. It had caused a furor in some other circles as well, namely among the great clans. There were supposed to only be 6 people who had ventured into the nightmare of the tomb of Ariel, after all, And since none of them was the author of the report, then who the hell was? And how did that person know so much about the Great River? Needless to say, the existence of the exploration report, written by nobody, was under a lot of scrutiny, which was why even a respected professor like Teacher Julius chose to hide its cover under a jacket and read it in the dream realm, as opposed to on his communicator in the waking world. When the old man smelled the delicious fragrance of coffee, he got distracted from his book and looked up. That smell, I've been looking forward to it all week. Sonny smiled and pointed to the exploration report. Are you reading that report again? Awakened Julius. The old man looked around and pressed a finger against his lips. I am, but shhh. You know this amazing work is supposed to be banned, Master Sunless. He picked up a fork and sighed dejectedly. Such a travesty. The depth of knowledge and wisdom the author of this remarkable work possesses is truly astounding. Their discoveries and insights have truly overturned our understanding of the history of the dream realm, especially its later stages. Not to mention the incredible revelations about the origins of the nightmare spell they documented. Such a person should be lauded and celebrated, not hunted. Those legacies are really out of line this time. Sonny smiled politely. Who do you think the author is? Teacher Julius looked thoughtful for a moment. A person of utter brilliance and integrity, no doubt. Well, they should be an old fossil like me, most likely. Probably one of the first-generation saints. Otherwise, I don't see how they could have survived the harrowing depths of the Great River, let alone avoid being found out by those who are trying to find them. He sighed. Well, a young man like you won't understand, Master Sunless. Being an explorer is a noble calling, you see. Not that there's anything wrong with making an honest living like you do. Gods know I would have been lost without your excellent cooking skills. Please excuse my outburst. This old man was being impolite. Sonny chuckled. No, you are right. Please enjoy your breakfast. With that, he bowed slightly and took a step back. The silver bell rang again, announcing the arrival of the next customer. The new customer was a young woman wearing a sharp but somewhat wrinkled formal suit. Her white blouse was buttoned up all the way despite the warm weather, and her dark hair was gathered in a bun. There were dark circles under her deeply intelligent but tired eyes. Unlike Teacher Julius, who visited Bastion in his sleep, she was a mundane human residing here permanently. It also seemed like she was visiting the brilliant emporium after burning the midnight oil and working through the night, instead of doing so first thing in the morning. The young woman glanced at Sonny, frowned slightly, then gave him a curt nod. Master Sunless. He hid behind a polite smile. Miss Bate. Chief Bethany, you've made it. Forgetting about Sonny's existence, Bate turned to where Julius was sitting and smiled brightly. Professor Julius, of course I have. Sonny received her order and retreated back into the kitchen. As he started preparing a cup of hot chocolate for the tireless scientist, he sighed and shook his head. She doesn't chain. Aiko, who had just finished running some calculations on a wooden abacus, gave him a curious glance. Oh, do you know Chief Bethany, boss? He lingered for a few moments, then shrugged stiffly. We had a few brushes in Antarctica. I doubt she remembers, though. Then he looked around and added, Can you pass me salt? Aiko continued to abuse the abacus, but the salt shaker floated from the shelf into Sonny's hand. That was her dormant ability, a weak form of telekinesis, which really put her integrity in doubt, considering that she used to run a gambling den in the Bright Castle. But who was Sonny to judge? Shaking his head, he finished making the hot chocolate, poured it into a ceramic cup with care, and walked out of the kitchen. As he was placing the cup on the table, he caught a part of the conversation between Teacher Julius and Bate. The old man was saying, So how are you and your team doing? Bate let out a long sigh and picked up her hot chocolate, warming her hands on the cup. Ah, we are drowning in work. There are rumors that our colleagues in Ravenheart had a breakthrough recently, but you know how it is. Both sides are hoarding information instead of sharing it. The guys from Valor are also tightening up security as if they are wary of spies. Madness, it's pure madness. They do understand that we could have achieved results twice as fast if there were fewer roadblocks for proper cooperation. She grimaced and shook her head. In any case, developing the infrastructure of Bastion has been a titanic undertaking. Thousands of engineers have given it their best, but with how strange the dream realm is, there are countless challenges. That is where we, the scientists, are supposed to step up. A distant expression appeared on Bates' face for a moment. She took a sip of her hot chocolate and savored it for a bit. Her gaze cleared a little. But even with all the data we gathered during the chain of nightmares, shielding technology remains simply ineffective. Actually, the entire approach is flawed, but the bigwigs are too myopic to realize that we should not be concentrating on developing better insulation to begin with. So, that was why I went and became a bigwig myself. Now we are on the right track at least. A subtle smile appeared on her face. Actually, there is progress. We are very close to creating a working model of a power station. There is no reason for electrical power not to work in the dream realm, right? And yet, it doesn't for now. But mark my words, I'll have the streets of Bastion illuminated by electric lights before the end of the year. And from there, all manner of things will become possible. Teacher Julius raised his hands and applauded her silently. Electricity, huh? Wonderful, simply wonderful. What are you using to generate the current? Soul essence, I presume. Bate shrugged. I mean, it's not that complicated. Most electricity in the waking world is still produced by steam-powered turbines. It's just the method of producing heat, and therefore steam, that differs. So, we are using heat. Granted, finding a way to produce heat from soul essence is the ultimate goal, a truly sustainable source of energy. After that, Bates' explanation became too technical for Sonny to understand. He had long retreated to the reception desk, of course, but his hearing was greatly enhanced when compared to that of mundane humans. He was a saint, after all. If Sonny wanted, he could eavesdrop on the conversations between the residents of the surrounding houses, let alone those of his own customers. Not that he was in the habit of doing such things. In any case, it seemed that what Bate was talking about was beyond Teacher Julius as well. After a while, he coughed in embarrassment and said in a hesitant tone, "Well, that sewage system you guys built is already remarkable enough. I mean it truly. A thing like that can make or break a city." Bate rolled her eyes. "Oh gods, don't remind me. The earth here is still full of the roots left behind by that titan. Any kind of subterranean construction is a nightmare." Sonny sighed and turned away. The shadow chair, which stood behind the reception desk, creaked quietly as he shifted his weight. She is living well, at least. When hundreds of millions of people entered the dream realm, there was an instant crisis having to do with how and where to settle them, of course. That crisis was not too terrible, though, because the great clans had been secretly preparing for an event like that for a long time. As a result, many of the best specialists in all things having to do with building a robust infrastructure had been either found among the refugees or recruited from the waking world. The prospering city around Bastion had not just appeared on its own. Countless engineers, architects, scientists, craftsmen, and professionals of all kinds had worked incredibly hard to make it a reality, awakened and mundane alike. Bate was one of these pioneers, and of a high rank at that. Of course, being a champion of civilization on the wild and hostile magical frontier was not an easy job, especially considering that the dream realm operated on a set of laws subtly different from the waking world, making most modern technology useless here. but human intelligence prevailed. Electricity before the end of the year. Sonny blinked a couple of times, trying to imagine what Bastion and other human cities in the dream realm would look like if something like that truly happened. What would they look like in 10 years? He wasn't sure he could guess. Well, if anyone could fulfill such a promise, it was Bate, Professor Obel's last disciple. The sun had risen above the horizon, bathing Bastion in warm radiance. The morning was already in full swing, and so Teacher Julius finally had to go. Goodness gracious, look at the time. He coughed, then looked at Bate with a smile. I am sorry, young lady, but this old man has to leave. I promised to meet a former colleague of mine, Master Rock. Now that he left the academy to pick up his mace, it's tough for us to cross paths. If I miss him today. Bate shook her head. Don't worry, Professor. I'm meeting someone else as well. Soon, the elderly awakened left. Bate continued to sip her hot chocolate, her weary gaze fixed on the beautiful white castle in the distance. Sonny, meanwhile, remained behind the reception desk, idly studying the latest issue of the Monster Almanac, an annual publication containing information about all the nightmare creatures humans had encountered in the last year. His interest in these abominations was not at all theoretical. Powerful memories demanded exceptional materials to be created, after all, and most of those materials came from the carcasses of slain abominations. Granted, a nobody like him rarely received an opportunity to trade for truly valuable trophies that Awakened brought back. Especially here in Bastion, where the enchanters of valor kept the best materials for their own use. Still, if he knew where to search, he could hunt the suitable nightmare creatures himself. Instructor Rock Sonny couldn't remember when he last saw the giant man. It was strange to know that one of his first instructors had not only returned to the battlefield, but also ascended at some point in time. The news of the sovereigns having conquered the fourth nightmare and the existence of the dream gates had truly invigorated humanity. With a vast and perilous frontier to conquer and make safe for the settlers, countless people had found new motivation to fight. Many of those less powerful were also burning with passion, wishing to help out however they could. Some simply dreamed of forging a better life for themselves in the new world. In any case, winds of change were blowing both over the dying waking world and over the dream realm which was killing it. I wish him luck. At that time, the silver bell rang again, and new customers entered the emporium. Sonny rose from his seat to welcome them. It was a young couple, both dressed in the kind of clothes Awakened usually wore outside of battle. Armor-type memories often had layers, and those layers could usually be summoned and dismissed independently. So, many Awakened simply dismissed the heavier elements of their armor and walked around in the base layer, which could look like anything. In fact, it often ended up looking peculiar at best and bizarre at worst. Strangely enough, the latest trend in the fashion world was to imitate this unconventional style, which was why many idols and public figures were sporting strange combinations of bespoke gambeson jackets, linen trousers, tunics, bodysuits, and kimonos these days. However, the couple was not trying to be fashionable. Both the young woman and the young man were seasoned, awakened warriors, which anyone who knew anything about the world could see at first glance. There were a lot of people like them after Antarctica, all easily recognizable by the hint of icy coldness left forever in the depths of their eyes. The young woman was petite, with mousy hair and an unassuming face. Her gaze, however, was calm and confident. The young man had unruly hair and mischievous eyes, a light smile never leaving his lips. The quiet seriousness of the woman did not fit well with the carefree attitude of the man, and yet they looked oddly harmonious together. The young man looked at Sonny and seemed disappointed for a moment. "Oh, it's you, Senior. Where's that cute little assistant of yours?" Sonny tilted his head a little. "She's in the kitchen." At the same time, the young woman glanced at her companion. "Why are you asking?" The young man laughed. "No reason, no reason. Gods, Kim, give your husband some credit. I was just surprised to see Master Sunless welcoming us personally, that's all." The couple were, of course, Kim and Luster, Sunny's former subordinates. The government had taken good care of the veterans of the evacuation army, so Luster was now as good as new despite having been gruesomely injured in Falcon Scott. Kim was doing well, too. Due to her unique aspect, the unassuming young woman was in high demand, being treated as a precious asset by the government. The two of them had married not long after the Southern campaign was over. Sunny was still bewildered by that fact, but also happy for them. Kim Luster. Bate waved at the young couple, and they joined her at the table. Sunny walked over to receive their order, then retreated into the kitchen. What a strange combination. Kim had ordered waffles, while Luster had ordered pancakes. Bate, who seemed to have worked up an appetite, joined Kim in deciding on the waffles, as well. The odd thing, though, was that they requested a bottle of hard liquor, too. Shaking his head, Sunny looked at Aiko and said, "Aiko, get the good stuff from the top shelf." She put the abacus away and looked at him darkly. His assistant was of very small stature, so it might have seemed like Sunny was bullying her by demanding the petite girl to get something from all the way on the topmost shelf. However, after glaring at him for a moment, Aiko simply floated to the ceiling, got the bottle of the expensive whiskey, and presented it to Sunny. That was her aspect. The dormant ability allowed Aiko to move objects, while the awakened ability allowed her to move herself. "Thank you kindly." Taking the bottle, Sunny picked up 3 glasses and went to deliver the whiskey to the esteemed guests. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.